All right, we're going to get started. Well, what do you guys think? You want to ship more often? Yes? No? We wonder. Well, welcome to SQL in the City. This is my first time here. Really excited to be here and talk about ALM and DevOps. And so when I was thinking about how to frame this discussion, I thought of one of my favorite romantic comedies, Four Weddings and a Funeral. So this is Four Weddings and a Funeral, ALM and DevOps. Before I get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I got started with HP 3000 minis. Anybody do 3000s, 9000s, DEC, AS400s, right? Real machines, right? Big iron, or medium iron, right? Not the big stuff. And I got first exposed to operations. I was a sysop. I had to do backups. I had to make sure the system stayed up. I had to be there when there was an earthquake and make sure the system got back up online. It's a joy living in Southern California for you. And then as I progressed, I got into databases on Windows, and of course, SQL Server. I worked with Microsoft to ship some of the first hands-on labs for SQL Server Yukon. And then I got involved in ALM, Application Lifecycle Management. And as an MVP, I spent a lot of time helping teams build software more effectively and help teams work better across those traditional boundaries of development and operations. In the process, I co-wrote a book on ALM with Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server. And I'm lucky to be a friend of Redgate, which means I get to use their great tools and hopefully help customers like you solve interesting problems. No one creates anything on their own anymore, and my presentation is helpfully influenced by a gentleman named David Chappell, who's a great deep thinker about how software should be built. A couple guys at Microsoft, Doug Seven and Matt Nunn, and of course the Redgate folks for having me here. So this is a story about relationships. When we think about relationships, we think about a projector working. There we go. In 1994, we got this story called Four Weddings and a Funeral. And when I started thinking about how this related to DevOps, I started thinking about the major things that happen in life. When we think about building software, we think about not just the little bits that we have to do on a daily basis, but we have to think about how this impacts an entire organization. And that's where application lifecycle management comes in. But we also need to talk about the bad things that happen in life, the death of a company. And hopefully how we can see a bright future when we use DevOps to change the culture of our organization to be more agile and to deliver software changes and solutions to our customers more quickly and effectively. So this quote from David Chappell really sums up what we think about ALM. When we think about like a human life, right, it's an application's life cycle that is demarcated by significant events. Right? When we think about software, it starts somewhere. It starts with an idea. And that idea then eventually becomes something. And when we think about two of life's biggest events, we have weddings and funerals. And as a framework for the story, Four Weddings and a Funeral, we want to think about how that defines ALM in context. Because ALM has three major tenets. The first thing is what we call governance. And this is about making the decisions related to your application. So we need to talk about that. And then there's development. When we think about software, development comes front and center. How do we build something? How do we craft it? How do we test it? And when we think about development, that is the SDLC. Now, sometimes people will confuse ALM with SDLC. ALM is about that entire realm on top of it, with software development lifecycle being a core part of it, a core tenet. And then finally, there's operations. This is where sysadmins and DBAs make sure that things stay up, that they don't fall over or under load, that bad things don't happen to our systems. So when we think about ALM as a set of cycles, we think about that idea. We need a solution. Take a SQL Lighthouse. This is a new product from Redgate. Redgate created this product because they saw a need. They heard from customers. And so they sat down, they thought about it, and then they had to start development. And right now they're in this development stage where they eventually are going to want to get it out. And at some point it might go end of life. They may create a new product. But ALM encompasses this entire portion from birth through life and then ultimately death. And we see that governance is one thing that goes from beginning to end. You're constantly making decisions at the business level to determine if this software technology, this package that integrates with your business, needs to be used and maintained. Within there, you might have iterative development cycles to create, maintain, and update the system. And then you're going to have operation cycles that often start just before you release that first version through the cycle of usage until you finally take it out of production. And hopefully you'll take it out of production properly. So in 4 Weddings and a Funeral, our first wedding was Angus and Laura. And I think the movie set a record for the number of F-bombs that were dropped in the first minute and a half by Hugh Grant. But I love the first part when he shows up at the church and his friend Fiona says, there's a sort of greatness to your lateness. Because when I think about ALM and governance, I think about project management. And sadly, what is often associated with software development? We're late, right? We can't get things shipped on time. And so one of the things we're trying to do is think, how can we improve visibility in what we need to build and make sure the organization is aware of the complexity that goes on and so that we can adapt appropriately. One of the big things that people have against software development is that they feel like they can't trust us. They can't trust us to give them a date and make it work. And that's often because we've tried to be too omnipotent about our vision. With ALM, we start thinking about breaking down the governance into a couple sections. The first thing is business case development. Why do we need this? You know, John at Redgate, I'm sure, doesn't just greenlight any software project. He has to think about how will the company make money on it? How will it affect the bottom line? And what problem is it solving, right? I mean, developers are notorious, right? They can think of a new software project every day except the one they're supposed to be working on. And so what we want to do is make sure that what we're building has a purpose. As we go forward, we start thinking about multiple projects and how they interact with our organization. I would argue no matter what company you're at today that you are a software company. Modern companies today can't be agile and cannot respond to business demand without good software products. And thus, organizations are faced with integrating software as a process into their larger business. I'm sure some of you are from the banking industry. We have healthcare, government. That's your primary business purpose. But software helps you be successful. And so we need to be able to integrate those portfolios with our software development projects. If you talk to many C-levels and directors of organizations, they could care less about Agile, they could care less about C#, SQL, Java, etc. What they care about is how are those software projects going to help the company, help the business need. And so we need to have this visibility of how we're doing as a software development team and as an operations team, but we need to provide the right amount of data, which means we need this level of vertical integration between the layers as well as this horizontal layer across our timeline. Which leads us to an emerging process in organizations, which is application portfolio management. How do we manage all these different software projects as they become more critical to the success of our business? And so when you think about governance, governance is about making decisions, and it runs the entire life cycle. And the key thing to understand is it's not a dirty word. It's something that's necessary to ensure that what we're doing helps the business, not hurt it. Now, our second wedding was Bernard and Lydia. And this is one of those events that came out of the first event. They met at the wedding, fell in love, and decided to get married. But one of the great scenes in this wedding is when Charles's brother David is signing with Serena. I'm just learning. I'm probably making tons of mistakes. She basically isn't getting the signing just right. Has anybody made mistakes at work? You ever screwed up something? Sure. Absolutely. And some of you are like, is my boss looking? No, right? I mean, fundamentally, development is a treacherous job. And we have to be prepared that we are going to make mistakes. The key thing with making a mistake is, can you recover from it? Right? Do you have the mechanisms in place to make sure that what you did does not ruin your life, ruin the company? When we think about how development fits in, development starts once the business case has been made. And this is where we start getting into the SDLC, the software development lifecycle. This is where we review our requirements. This is where we actually write code. And this is hopefully where we're doing lots of testing. Now, the key thing that's been happening in the software development industry over the last 10 years is this push to Agile development methodologies. I'm a big fan of Agile. Now, that's the little a. I don't get big A and wear robe and sandals and preach about the best way that you must do it. What I argue is that we want to be continuously working towards improvement. And whether that's with Scrum, Lean, or any other different types of mechanisms out there, it's all about the same thing. Delivering value more effectively and with higher quality. And if we ultimately can reduce the cycle times, we're going to improve the entire organization because they'll have the changes they want sooner, they'll have the software they need, and they'll be able to move forward. There's nothing worse than being a business user and knowing that you could use a solution in place today and know you won't get it for a month. Or God forbid, you won't even know when you get it because you don't trust your developers to give you even a half-good answer. So we're going to see that over time, we're going to continuously be in these looping processes of the SDLC as part of ALM. And the key thing to understand is that development takes many forms, from waterfall to agile. But we have to keep this logic that it's a continuous stream. It doesn't end when we ship something. In fact, arguably, we want to start thinking about shipping as a final location. It's just another step on the road. And then we came to our third wedding of Hamish and Carrie. And I thought this was particularly funny here. I'd like to go to the wedding of someone I really loved for a change. Right? I'm sure some of you have gone to the wedding because you had to. It would be wrong if you didn't. And you just hope that the bar would be good. This is sometimes how developers and operations feel about each other. There's a little bit of love lost. And remember, when I think about operations, I think about data. There's database developers, there's DBAs, the administrators. And we have somewhat opposing views of life. And therefore, it sometimes creates conflict in how we get along. Now, we have to understand that operations is critical. And you'll notice that operations often starts before the application is shipped, and it should. We need to know we have the right operating system in production, the right version of the database, the right edition. Do we have enough RAM? Do we have enough disk space? Have we properly prepared the environment? All those things need to be taken into account before the application is actually shipped. But once it is put into production, we have to make sure it's maintained and that it's monitored. And that if something bad does happen, we find the root cause of the infection and fix it as soon as possible to keep the business running. But this often creates a friction point then between development and ops on how we're going to do this. And so what we need to think about when we monitor is that operations is responsible both for building and maintaining the environments that our systems run in, but also effectively monitoring the applications and getting that information back to the appropriate people, whether it's development or stakeholders, when something isn't working right. Now, a big part of life is sadly death. And the movie had a funeral. And when I first saw the title, I thought, how do you get 4 weddings at a funeral together and make it interesting? Well, sadly, funerals are serious businesses. And I have a short story about a company that is no more. Some of you may have heard of this company, particularly if you're in the finance sector. The company was known as Knight Capital Group. And in 2012, bad things happened to them. They were a financial services firm on the New York Stock Exchange. The data I read, they're responsible for about 16% of the trades that were going on at that time in 2012. They're building a new order handling feature, a feature specifically responsible for creating child orders out of parent orders. And as one is apt to do, developers replaced old code with new code. What could possibly go wrong? It turns out the system had some 9-year-old code still in the system. In other words, they took a system out of production, but for some reason left the code on the production servers. They then repurposed a flag, and in this system, the flag meant instructions on how the system was supposed to operate. So think configuration files. And in doing so, a technician copied the new code to 7 of 8 servers. They went live. They started losing $172,000 a minute. They tried to fix it. At the end of the day, in 45 minutes, the company had lost $460 million. They started the day with $400 million in assets. Whoops. 45 minutes. One mistake. What would be the impact on your organization if you lost $460 million in 45 minutes? I have this weird problem. I like being employed. It's a weird thing I have, I know. Especially because I get this paycheck, and I get this check, and I can do things like pay my mortgage. I can feed my family. So this is a catastrophic event caused by human error, by bad processes. Now what's interesting is, how do we know so much? Well, it turns out we got one hell of a bug report. You can download this online. As a company involved in finances, they were subject to regulatory monitoring by the Security Exchange Committee, or Commission, excuse me. And they went and did a study, and they published it as an 18-page PDF that you can download. And in the details, you'll find that human error, coupled with bad processes, led to this catastrophic event. Something completely preventable. So when we get to this point in life, we start thinking about all that ALM stuff and go, oh, that seems like a bunch of bother. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe having some method to our madness would be good. Now, after the tragic events of the movie, we got one more wedding. And of course, the wedding didn't start out or end like everybody thought it would. But Tom has the right thoughts. At least it's one we won't forget. What we want to do is learn from Knight Capital Group and improve how we build software, how we manage it, and how we complete the cycle. And this is where we get DevOps. DevOps for some organizations is nothing new, but for most of us it is. Because it starts with this notion that we're going to break down a barrier that exists in most organizations, which is development works on one side of the house and operations is another side. And occasionally meet in the break room and hopefully don't get in fisticuffs. The key thing we're trying to do here is be more agile in how we deliver solutions to our users, our customers. And to do that, it's going to require we change the way we build software. It's going to require a better life cycle. When we think about what DevOps is, it's a full life cycle investment. It's about thinking about how teams work beyond their silos and getting rid of it. The whole combination of the name, developer and operations to DevOps, is exactly what it sounds like. It means we're going to stop having fiefdoms of separate organizations. The whole idea is to enable teams to deliver software solutions quickly and more effectively. And so what we want to do is think about continuous delivery of value across the entire life cycle, from governance through software development and into operations. When we think about what's driving this, it's this cycle of life that we have in software. It starts at the top with requirements, our users' wishes, the things they want in the application, the things they need to do their jobs. And what's happening there is developers are getting better. We're building software of higher quality. Agile is working. It's not perfect. And the key thing to understand about not being perfect is that you don't buy it off the shelf, because it starts with you. But because developers are getting software done more quickly and more effectively, that means we're having this release pipeline that's building up. And organizations that don't automate are doomed to fail. And so what we need is aggressive pipeline management that can get the code into production, and then we need to have tools to monitor and analyze how it's being used. So we loop back to that requirement stage and loop to our backlog. We know what's most important to be worked on next. And the cycle has to keep going and going. And the key thing then is we need collaboration between the two. We can't have people saying it's their fault. It's their fault. The servers weren't available. Oh, they wrote buggy code. Does anybody care when you're both on the unemployment line? It doesn't solve it to place blame. What solves it is to make sure you don't get there in the first place. Now, when we think about DevOps, there are different flavors. In particular, we're learning from some of the unicorns in the industry on how they've done it. Facebook, Xbox Live, Bing, Twitter, Flickr. These are internet scale properties that have learned to be very agile and scale at internet levels for hundreds of millions of users. And if you believe Facebook's number, over 1 billion. To be able to do that, they had to change their processes from how they took code from development and got it into production. They had to be aggressive about responding to change, about responding to demand. And this meant rethinking the way they did all the parts of their software development lifecycle. At the other extreme of web ops, we have no ops. These are typically small companies, small organizations, startups, where developers are responsible for operations. Like I said, I got started on the operations side and quickly learned that as a developer, knowing about operations helped me do my job. In enterprises, unfortunately, we tend to have the siloed implementations. And it can't change overnight that you're magically going to go to a pure DevOps or WebOps type of style. Which means you got to start thinking about how you're going to do it, which means collaboration at the enterprise level. Do your job, but do it better by working across the line. When we think about our goals and success metrics, it's really broken down to two things: agility and reliability. Deliver the solutions faster with higher quality and make sure they run reliably in production. And reduce the mean time to repair when something is found. We're not going to not make mistakes. We're human. But we can respond to those mistakes quickly and effectively if we have the appropriate processes in place and hopefully the right tools to back us up. So how does this relate to ALM? How does DevOps fit into this ALM process? Well, if we think about this chart again, when we think about traditional Agile, we go through and we look at requirements, we do our development, and we test. We keep doing that, and we get to a point where we actually got something to ship. And so we release that out to production. We then go forward and do that again and again. The problem is there's a certain amount of cycle time there. Time that can be indeterminate as far as when the next release will come out. In fact, this is why you have to keep learning, because as we've been improving our Agile processes, we've found problems in our mechanisms. Scrum is very popular. Forrester has numbers that say of the organizations that are doing Agile, 80% are doing Scrum. And Scrum is really good. It really helps development teams become a holistic unit. The downside to Scrum is Scrum drops off at the point where we finish coding. It doesn't focus on that extended process of how do we get into release. It actually maintains one of the bad things in software development, which is, hey, we're done with it, it's not my problem. I'll leave that up to the DBAs and the sysops to get the code out there and get into production. Call me when something goes bad. And so we start thinking about Agile with continuous delivery. Right? The demo this morning was awesome. I loved watching them click and push things out with just a few mouse clicks. And what we start thinking is that we're going to do this cycle constantly to the point that we do it when the requirements demand it. This is one of the keys. We want to go to this pull model, which is we continuously fill the pipeline on the development side, and so that we on the operations side can say, yeah, we're ready, give it to us. We want it. We've got everything in place. We want to remove the impediment that is traditionally a shipping deadline. There shouldn't be a deadline. It should just be, we'll ship as soon as we're ready. And as you develop better processes, the theoretical option is that you can ship out of mainline. Which means if you're a developer, you've checked in a bit of code, and that code is so good and well tested that it's ready to go into production. Now, it might not be a complete feature, but it won't cause the company to go bankrupt either. So this ultimately starts leading to feedback loops. And we have two feedback loops we're concerned with. Number one, the customers. Without customers, we're not employed. No one needs our software. And then the second loop is the DevOps feedback loop. Right? I'm not naive to believe that you can suddenly go in and say, we're just going to have DevOps, we're not going to have developer and operations teams, we're not going to separate them. Far from it. This is something that's going to evolve. And as John mentioned, start first with, do you have version control for your database? Right? That's a good example. So as you start, it's going to start about closing that loop. So you constantly know that, yes, we can take your new build, and operations says, yes, we're ready, and there's something wrong, you guys can fix it, because here's the information we have for you. Now, how do you get there? Well, once again, we look to those who have come before us. We look to the unicorns out there. And so there's a great talk done in 2009 at O'Reilly's Velocity Show by John Allspaw and Paul Hammond from Flickr. Who can deploy 10 times a day here? Anybody? Awesome. Raise your hands again, guys. And ladies. I couldn't see everybody. Good. Find these people later. Talk to them. Now, just because you can doesn't mean you do it. Right? And I know some of you are thinking this as a system person, I can relate to this. Look, when I got 10 terabytes of data, I don't just do daily updates. Right? I have to think about things. And that's okay. And arguably, when you think about 10 deploys a day, that might be very small pieces of the application, but not your entire database. Right? You're not going to be pushing a schema change 10 times a day. Databases, especially when they're very large, require special care and feeding. That's why we need optimized processes and optimized tooling. But it doesn't mean we can't get to this realm for parts of our application. So don't get all cynical on me and fall asleep yet. We still have a lot to talk about. Now, the way they got to 10 plus deploys a day is with the A word, automated infrastructure. This is the key to success, and the keynote brought it home. We do not want people in tools like SMS updating things. We want to do it through dedicated tools that understand this process that we're doing, that can provide us with reliable information and provide us with opportunities to go, no-go, and if necessary, roll back. Automation is the key to success in any DevOps process. Shared version control. This is another thing that Flickr found worked. And when I say shared, I mean shared between ops and development. No more secrets. Yeah, I'm not going to give the random sysadmin commit rights to my main code line. At the same time, I don't expect to have rights to look at their scripts that do security updates as far as changing them. But what I do need to know is, how do we provision environments as a developer? How do I let you know what I need for my web server? How do I let you know what specific features I might need in an SQL server? Nothing worse than doing a deployment than finding, oh, we need this change. Oh, we got to take the server offline to do an installation and patch. No, that ain't going to happen. So we need to have a shared repository. And with things like DevOps, when you have tools like Chef, Puppet, Octopus, Microsoft's PowerShell DSC, this is a place for us to learn and to share with each other. One-step build and deploy. If you're a developer or a DBA, you work with source code. And that code needs to be put into version control. And once it's in version control, the next step is to make sure it works on someone else's machine. Right? Nothing worse than, well, it worked on my machine yesterday. I don't know what's wrong with yours. Right? It's critical that you take those assets and you build them. Right? If you use an SQL server, maybe you're going to generate DAC packs and do a deployment. Maybe it's just going to dump out the T-SQL scripts that you're then going to review and then push out to production. The bottom line is you need to have this separation of concerns from, hey, it worked for this person, and now it works for the team. And it should be automated. For developers building applications, you need to start rethinking how you architect your applications. And this applies to the database too, particularly to things like stored procedures. We need to be able to have our code adapt based upon the availability of the feature. It's not realistic that you can build entire features in 3-week sprints. Those 3-week sprints are little stepping stones to full features that customers can perceive and use. Which means the system has to know that this code is good versus this code is not online. Now, I want to make a key point. We made the comment about Knight Capital Group having a feature flag. Theirs was not this. Theirs was something about configuration. They just called it a flag in the SEC report. We talk about from an application perspective, this means being able to, for example, do A/B testing. Give a subset of your users a new feature while you give another group a different feature. Flickr did this with a lot of their new pro features. They'd give it to some of their very high volume users, the people who logged into Flickr 20, 30 times a day. And they would see how they reacted. They would see how they reacted by their usage patterns and by their feedback. And this can only work if you can be agile enough to turn this stuff on and off. As an ALM MVP, I work with Microsoft's Visual Studio Online product, and they use the same architecture. I've signed up for what they call dog fooding, which means I get new features sometimes by surprise. Some mornings I log in and it's a who moved my cheese situation because my whole dashboard may be changed. But I signed up for that. For regular customers, you will get updates and they'll tell you, hey, we're doing an update. And they'll push their update reports. And the only way they're able to do this is because they have this architecture that allows them to incrementally release features of the application as they're ready, get feedback, and then respond to that feedback. Shared metrics are critical. Once again, this goes back to no secrets. Everybody should have visibility on how an application is doing. At mature organizations, you see this in the form of nice LCD panels showing you things like the builds, the status of the servers, memory usage, right? Logged in users, contention rates. All those things are visible to everybody so that everybody knows how the system is doing. And as I said, your main business might not be software, but how many of you could function without software? 2 weeks ago, I was going down to Atlanta to speak at Xamarin's show. And I found out the day before that Delta Airlines had a problem. They lost connectivity to their internet backbone. They had to check in people by hand. They had to do paper tickets. I mean, airports are bad enough now. Can you imagine the pain and suffering if you went to Heathrow tomorrow to fly and that's how you had to get checked in? Yeah, there'd be a few canceled flights, huh? And then there's people like Ryanair, I don't know how they'd function, right? Because they fine you, don't they, if you don't show up with your check-in slip, right? That's what I heard. I mean, it's lunacy to think about it, but it's true. Without your systems, a lot of companies could not function. And finally, the C word, communication. You must communicate with your partners across the aisle. They don't bite, I promise. They're human just like you. So there's 3 things when we think about DevOps. People, interaction, and then finally tools. When we think about people, it's all about getting along. You need to break down those barriers and break down your organizations. You really need to think about what it means to be a unit, not separate fiefdoms. Now, with a lot of organizations I work with, particularly large organizations, it starts with virtual teams. I'm on one right now at a big hardware manufacturer in the US. There's 3 of us that are focused on DevOps for 40 different teams across 1,000 developers. It's our job to analyze their processes and help them start automating their DevOps process. We then are going to go and find a person from each team who's going to take the lead approach to bringing DevOps culture to that team, and they're going to introduce to their IT person. Right now, we don't have the influence at the corporate level to just say, hey, it's just going to be DevOps all the time. And in fact, it's not practical. So we're starting with this virtual implementation where they'll eventually, hopefully, in the next 3 to 5 years, have replaced these siloed teams with DevOps teams on a per product basis. Now what this means is that some people will have to learn new things. You will have fringe users, right? Some developers will never learn how to set up a router or install a server. And some of your admins, yes, will be focused mostly on the more mechanics and will not have to actually understand anything about the app. But for the rest of us, we're going to have knowledge about how I get my code in production and how that affects the system. I'm going to have to understand servers and routers and networking and configuration. And those people on the admin side are going to have to understand these crazy little pieces of applications, these DLLs, these database files, these configuration scripts, these certificates, these horrible things that developers make for us. And you're going to have to start working together. Eventually, you'll be able to move to a real DevOps team and a real DevOps culture. And when you have to talk to management and say, you know, we want to do this, how do you convince them? Just give them that bug report I told you about. Give them my slides. Ask them if you're willing to go out of business because someone made some mistake. It's too late to point fingers after you're out of the job. And at the end, you want to embrace Kaizen. Now, Kaizen is a term out of Japan that is basically a system for continuous improvement. And that means we need to focus on baby steps. The key thing about DevOps is you don't just buy it off the shelf. It starts with the people and then the way you interact, the way you do things. And so what we want to do is change our interactions. A lot of this comes from the development side, and it starts with shortening those cycle times. Not thinking about what we're going to work on for the next 6 months, not for the next 3 months, but a cycle of 2 weeks to 4 weeks is good. Microsoft has found for Visual Studio Online, 3 weeks works really well. That means they ship an update about every 3 weeks. Now these aren't monumental mammoth changes, but they do have new value incrementally delivered to the users on a regular basis. So by focusing on the flow, it starts with continuous integration. We talked about this in the earlier keynote, where a developer takes their code, or a DBA takes some T-SQL or stored procedures, whatever, and you check it in. So now you've got this point-in-time snapshot of what I did, and then you're going to go through and you're going to build it. You're going to integrate it with other parts of the system. You're going to do some sanity checks, some smoke tests, some BVTs. And you're going to validate that what you changed did not create massive problems. It's that first line of defense to know that, yes, we can move forward. Then it's continuous testing. The biggest mistake organizations make today is that they have test teams. Yes, it's a mistake to have test teams. Testers need to be embedded with developers. This is what I love about Scrum. Scrum says there isn't a developer, there isn't a tester, there isn't an architect. We're all team members, we're all developers. Yes, you might have a focus on quality, and yes, you might need some test title to maybe get your paycheck. Fine, I don't care what HR calls you. Titles are for weenies. It's people that get things done that matter. Testers need to live with developers. I work with an organization in the Pacific Northwest, and they were having a problem with getting code tested in time to get released and with high quality. Their cycle times were off. They would finish a sprint but not be through tests. Solution was simple. We disbanded the test team, we moved them all, they redid all the cubes, and the testers now sit with the developers, they go to the daily scrum with the developers, they work side by side. Testing is something that everybody's responsible for. I did a talk on this a couple years ago at TechEd, and people walked down the room and left eval. It's horrible. I'm a developer, not a tester. You know, test is not a bad word. Everybody's responsible. For developers, it means doing things like unit testing. It means doing integration tests. It means doing it on a regular basis. And then there's continuous delivery. The key with continuous delivery isn't that you do it, it's that you can do it. That you have confidence in what's checked in will not break the bank. That it's of high quality, that it has been appropriately tested, that its impact on the system is known, that its requirements have been transmitted to those who maintain the production servers, that has gone through multiple environments that simulate production. And then we have continuous feedback. We need to make sure we're in constant communication with our users and with those who are running the system. This needs to be an interaction that is constantly flowing. One of the biggest problems you have in organizations is that you have help desks. Now, help desks are good intentioned, but how many of you call the help desk and just cringe and you just get a cup of coffee and sit there and go, okay, I've got 45 minutes before I get anything done, right? IT help desks are the bane of productivity because they put up this extra set of blocking in the name of better organizational efficiency. I call BS. Developers should be able to be interacting with users directly. Operations should be able to call the developer. Developers should be able to ask a user, is this really what you meant when you sent this requirement in that went through 3 layers of BS and analysis? We need to break down the barriers. We need a flattened hierarchy. Now, for some people, this is scary, right? There's people that make a living out of being those roadblocks in your organization. And I'm sorry, go find another job. I don't feel bad for you if you're one of those people. We need to work more effectively. And we need to be focused on continuous improvement. Incremental steps. If you may have noticed, I got a weight problem here. And I've been working hard at it. And I've tried diets, I've tried exercise, and being a developer, it's one of those problems I have. I spend too much time with the computer. My solution was simple. Smaller changes. So the first step I did was I cut out Pepsi and Coke products. Besides the fact that if you chemically look at them, they'll kill you, it's poison. That was my first step. And so in the last year, I was able to lose 20 pounds. I actually went a whole year without having a Pepsi or Coke, whereas I used to be a one-a-day kind of guy. And that was the one little step. That was the only thing I did. I just focused religiously on that. I still had beer. I love beer. I try and eat healthier. I try and have more chicken than beef, but I still have a good steak. The key was small steps, and that applies to software. It applies to what we do. And now, finally, Redgate's like, oh, good, he's going to talk about tools, finally, right? You don't buy DevOps as a product. Tools can help, though, and the right tools can make all the difference in the world. Successful DevOps teams are going to have version control for everything. If it's something that can be tracked and changed, it needs to go in version control. I don't care if you use Subversion, TFS, Git, whatever makes you happy, right? Redgate has a great product for developers and DBAs. Use something and use it religiously. Make sure you back it up. Work tracking. This is critical. Yes, we need to track bugs. Absolutely. We need to track feature requests. We need something, though, that is holistic and viewable across organization. Now, I'm biased. I think TFS and Visual Studio Online are a great solution. And one of the reasons I really like it is because they've made it available to enterprises for free in the aspect that anyone in an organization who's not a developer or a professional IT person can still reach in and provide feature requests. They can put in bugs. They don't have to pay a license fee to do that. So you can have one holistic place where everybody can collect information. And what's really nice about it is it has rich tools for developers to do their job, but also has a Kanban board feature that allows you to specify the work in progress, and you can share that across your development and ops teams, and even have your business users and stakeholders have visibility into this. And Kanban boards are really a simple way of seeing work in different stages and defining a pull mechanism to where I can pull work from one stage to another. If you're not familiar with it, take a read up on it. It's really proven itself in the lean and agile community. And with the fact that you can have tools that are visible through a web browser through anyone in the organization, whether it's TFS or some other product, having that set up will really give people insight as to when things are going to be available for them. Assembling and packaging. This is the notion of a build server and the ability to take these assets and get them ready for production. One of the best things about continuous integration and build servers is that they make sure you have all the pieces. right? How many times have you tried to ship something and someone forgot, oh, we left out this XML file, right? It's on my machine, but I forgot to check it in. Build servers help you find that. They help you take the pulse of your development team. Are we ready to ship? We don't have to ship, but are we ready? Is our input of high quality, right? We don't want garbage in, garbage out. We want high quality in, high quality out. And so you need tools to do that. Deployment, right? We saw Octopus deploy. We saw the SQL Lighthouse product. We need automated tools. Humans should not be doing deployments. The only people that should be doing deployments manually are the developers the very first time they figure out how to do it. In fact, developers ask me, well, Brian, I'm just one developer. I can't affect change, but you can. The next time you go to build a new feature for your application and that feature needs something new, it needs a config change in IIS, it needs an extra feature inside SQL Server, figure out how to do that in an automated fashion. If you're doing this on Windows, that means PowerShell, folks. You got to learn it. Okay? If you're doing cross-platform, right, look at Chef, look at Puppet. Even PowerShell now is supporting cross-platform with their Linux integration. But the point is that the second time you do it, it should be done with a script. It should be some automated format. Now, developers, if you're like that, I warn you against digging into like C#, C++, or your favorite real tool, because that's a recipe for overanalyzing and overdeveloping. That's why scripting is really good. It's a good compromise between automation and not getting bogged down in the details. Write that script and then put it in version control. Put it in some folder that says, hey, snippets for doing deployments. And then that way, when the deployment team or the people that are responsible for doing the automated deployment come in, you can say, hey, I need this new feature and there's the code to do it. You might need to tweak it a little, but I've done the hard, heavy lifting for you. You start doing that, people will go, oh, that's a great idea. We should automate more of this. If you use things like PowerShell and say Octopus, they just go hand in hand together. You can now build your release pipeline from the start. Monitoring. You got to know what's going on. You have to have insight. That's why when Redgate came with their SQL Monitor project, I thought this was just great. Nice, lightweight, beautiful looking tool. Let me monitor my SQL server and see how they're doing. This is becoming a hot topic in the industry. You're seeing lots of other companies getting into the game late, but it also means we're going to see lots of innovation. And monitoring goes hand in hand with analytics, because there's two types of things. Number one, real-time monitoring and analytics of what's going on, but then also the ability to gather telemetry from your applications about how they're being used. When you're building new systems and building new features for an application, one of the things you run into is, what do we build next? We have that backlog, and for some of us, our backlogs are just eternal, right? They never end. How do you decide what is next? Have you ever been in a meeting where someone who shouts the loudest gets what they want? Yeah. It's maybe whoever, I've seen in meetings where someone just, they'll go, I give up. You have what you want. It's not worth it to me. I'll wait for the next release. If you have analytics and you have telemetry, you can make better decisions about what goes into your system. A good example for folks like me in the US when we're building systems is we have a very English-American bias to the systems of what we do. Localization isn't front and center on a lot of our minds. But if I have data that shows that half of my customers are coming from China, I might want to consider localization. Now, I might also want to correlate those 50% of the users. Does it translate to 50% of my revenue? That might be interesting. But how am I going to get that information? And for those of you with more of a database background, if you do BI, business intelligence, we know this is where the money is, right? This is where the keys to the kingdom are on building the right systems. And we're seeing dedicated products around this. Microsoft is getting in the game in a big way with something called Application Insights. Xamarin 2 weeks ago launched their own product. We'll probably see a bunch more. And I expect to see Redgate delivering any higher value features like this in their applications. Hint, hint, guys, I got some feature requests. But at the end of the day, tools are the last thing you consider. There's a certain maturity that is necessary to embrace DevOps. And it starts with you. You are the key to success in your organization. So I have a final thought. And as I mentioned, I got started a long time ago, and I have some gray hair to prove it. The problem with age and experience is it creates a bias. you had a bad experience once and therefore you can't use something. I see this all the time with people in their view of Microsoft. Microsoft is not the company that was sued by the US federal government for antitrust. They're a much different company today. Your experience in something you did should influence how you move forward, but it shouldn't stop you from changing. And so I want you to do is make sure that your experience isn't an impediment to your ability to learn and grow, for you to grow and for your organization to grow. At the end of the day, no one wants to be Knight Capital Group. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of SQL in the City. Thanks for coming.